let's dive into spring painting. I started with a glaze. Actually, this glaze, its only purpose is for me to see where the thinnest branches of the distant trees are, and if it looks alright, if the horizon is too high. So I'm just shooting and seeing whether the composition is going to be alright. And I estimated that it's more or less the high horizon is working for this composition. So as you saw in the beginning of the video, there are two main accents: the backlit flowers and backlit branches of a tree. And this is my main goal, to show that. So the background details are very irrelevant, and I don't concentrate. I use the biggest brush that can work for that purpose. So that to show aerial perspective, I mix gray, blue into the greens, and that way that shows that the trees are more distant compared to those in the middle ground and in the foreground. And the same with the shadows. The shadows in the distance are lighter, and that way it also tells our brain that the distance is happening between the planes. So I'd say the most important thing is to not concentrate on details, not to overwork, not to overblend, and keep the distant planes cooler, lighter, less contrast there, and just move on, because the most interesting stuff is happening on the foreground. That is why, or middle ground, it depends. But the things you don't paint are as important as the things you try to focus on. And now let's go to the sky. So the sky is not bright blue. It's gray plus white plus small amount of ultramarine or any other blue you use for the sky. You may hear that colors like Naples yellow and all these grays and all this interesting in-between colors are not useful. Especially the beginner painters should not buy them. But the more I paint, the longer I paint, the better I know that having a gray color as an anchor and knowing that it's consistently the same color actually helps, and it's just a time saver. So when I paint in acrylics, I just pre-mix ultramarine plus burnt umber plus white. Not long ago, I started mixing warmer and lighter shades of brown with different blues, and I get very interesting gray shades depending on whether you favor brown or blue. It can be a warmer or a cooler gray. So I just totally insist that everyone who paints landscapes should mix those browns and blues and whites and see what happens, because grays are everywhere. And there are painters who totally take advantage of grays, and they complete amazing paintings in grays with nuances and variations that are breathtaking. So coming back to this painting, the main thing is to keep in mind that trees are growing at random distances. Some are closer, some are further, some are in bunches, some are very thin and distant and almost transparent, some are thicker, closer. So this is an important principle. And another principle I often use is from dark to light. In oil painting, it's very easy to achieve. You just use the darkest shade of whatever you're painting, and then you apply lighter shades on top. And depending on how blended you need to be to resemble reality, you just blend it or not. And this blending is actually a good place where you can find your own style. You can avoid blending altogether, or you can blend it and make it look almost photorealistic, and make your brush mark disappear. So this is the personal taste. There's no right or wrong. It's just the way you want to express yourself. And in my case, I like the paint work to be meaningful. That is, when a shape is expressed by a brush mark, I try to keep that brush mark as expressive and as intact as possible. And here, where I'm painting wet into wet, brush marks are unavoidable, because otherwise the whole concept of backlighting will disappear. So you cannot blend highlighted elements, because they will just become middle value. So I advise, if you like this effect, just have a considerable amount of paint on the tip of your brush, and never go back to the same area, or try avoiding going back. So I definitely did overwork some areas, and next time, or I'm painting the same story, I will definitely be more considerate with my brush marks. If we talk about the definition, the brushwork is the particular style that an artist has of putting paint onto the painting with a brush. Then it opens the whole area of where you can express yourself, because your handwriting, your style, your ability to push, press, blend, and use your own gestures, your own approach, your taste, to express yourself and to be different from similar painters. So main thing when working wet into wet is to try to leave brush marks where you need them to be. Maybe don't hurry to put a brush mark, but just think carefully where to put it, so that you don't have to correct it, because it will leave a mess if you try to correct it. And with that, I mixed this color flowers. It's yellow, white, plus a little bit of green, so that the color of the flowers, the petals in the distance, is a little bit darker and cooler from the color of petals in the foreground. Now that the block-in stage complete, and every area of canvas is covered with oil paint, it's time to let it dry and start another day with painting the distant grasses, giving some highlights, but again, they are darker than the foreground. The contrast is not as high. So if you compare the contrast in the foliage in the foreground and the foliage, the lit part and the shadow part of the grasses in the background, it's decreased dramatically. So it's Also, one thing to keep in mind when you are painting a landscape is the amount of light and shade you do in every area of the painting. And depending whether you want your painting to be high key, saturated, high value painting, you may use paint straight from the tube. But that way the aerial perspective will diminish. In this case, I added a little bit of blue to the green grasses and green trees in the second and third planes of the painting. And this way, the lit part of those trees in the distance is not as bright, as saturated as the lit part of a tree that I am about to paint. So I used Winsor & Newton blending and glazing medium to paint the darkest part of the trunk of the tree so that it will be easier for me to apply highlights as soon as the darkest part dries a little bit. And it's an open secret that trees are not brown, so I don't think I even used brown. It almost doesn't matter what dark colors you use as long as they're darker than those in the distance. So the main takeaway is that colors are not important as long as the values are correct. And again, some painters find their style in rendering values, in interpreting values. So here it's a field of exploration for every artist. And now it's time to apologize because I took a break, and when I came back I forgot to turn on my camera and never recorded how I painted backlit leaves in the foreground. But it's the same as the daffodil leaves, so it's kind of easy, I think. So this is how I painted this spring painting, and next one is summer, which I promise will have some surprises, so don't go too far. See you in another video.